Why don't we get started with a prayer? Gracious God, we give you thanks for this day, and we pray that our Thanksgiving would continue beyond this week. We'd ask that you would bless the meals and the conversations that occur on Thursday and be with those folks who are traveling and give us some insight today into your word. We pray that you would challenge us and inspire us and encourage us through your word. Amen. All right. So where are we? So last week we started with this section that is I call the antitheses. It starts in verse 21, and it's an affirmation of the law and the prophets. Do not think that I came to abolish the law. And he says, not one stroke of the law will disappear until God's kingdom comes. And then he follows with these 6, they call them antitheses, and they go, you have heard it said, but I say to you. And in there he said, you've heard it said, you shall not murder, but I say, if you're even angry. That kind of thing. And then at the in these things, it's that Jesus, I made the point, is claiming to have the authority to interpret or to give the true meaning of the law. So he would tell something that Moses, a law that Moses gave them, and then say, now here's what it really involves. And he tended to move from the letter of the law, which allowed for loopholes, to the spirit of the law, or the internal, the law that begins in one's heart. So last week we talked about, oh no, this is this week. We're going to do these last 4. You've heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. If you divorce, you should give the woman a certificate of divorce. You've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and love your neighbor and hate your enemy. So those are the 4 that are left here for us. They're the hardest ones, and so we'll give them our best shot. So you've heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say, everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And we would maybe note that it seems to be targeted towards a man, because it's written with the, if you look at a woman with lust, you've already committed adultery in your heart. What I'm finding out is all of my notes are disappearing out of here, though. That's kind of interesting. So it might be a quick class.
Well, have you gone to speaker view? Because there's a different view that has your notes.
I'm on presenter view, and I am recording, and it just says no notes in the part where the notes are typically going to be. So we'll find out. We'll find out how much I really know about this whole thing. So everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery in his heart. And it's a challenging statement. It's a statement, or it's a statement of Jesus that got Jimmy Carter in trouble, right, back in the 70s. I have lusted in my heart. It's a statement that challenges kind of the guy's casual statements. When I was in college, I heard guys say, and I'm trying to remember if I ever did, but, well, you can look at the menu, but you just can't order, would be a statement. And this goes both ways. And have you heard the term micro cheating or silent cheating? It's a concept that although one doesn't engage in a physical relationship, you make emotional connections with somebody at the office, somebody at your church, somebody in a club that is more than appropriate. Or they say that you know it's micro cheating when you work to keep your spouse from finding out. It maybe it's a text message relationship that you keep hidden, and it's got a whole psychological diagnosis or an explanation because it's common. And people know that feeling when they have a connection with somebody that is more than casual, or that they look forward to seeing that person in a way. And so this goes on in a myriad of different ways. The other thing that I've heard and feel uncomfortable with personally is, and I don't know if it's your generation or if it's a younger generation, but married couples talk about the list. That concept that you get 5 people that you can sleep with if the opportunity comes up. And the idea, and generally it's all good fun and games because people, say, well, if Julia Roberts ever approached me, and then your spouse says, yeah, you go ahead if that's the case, because they know it never will until someone says, well, my list includes your sister. And then all of a sudden people go, oh no, this isn't fun anymore. But it's this way that we take casually the ideas of extramarital or extra relational affairs or relationship. And so everyone who just looks with lust has already committed adultery in his heart. So what is the problem with lust? Why would that be not okay?
Takes you off focus of God.
Okay, so it distracts you from a focus of God.
It might lead to the next step.
They say we do boundary training, they call it, in now in the Presbyterian Church. I did it in my other denomination too. And the comment that I remember that stuck with me is, before you cross a boundary, you've said yes to 100 little things that got you there. And so you need to say your no's way back here rather than run up against the line. But people don't, and it happens. The other part of this is that lust reduces the other person to a single characteristic, a sexual being. And more than that, usually they're reduced to a sexual being who exists to give me pleasure. And so I diminish their humanity by making them one-dimensional. I diminish the fact that they have aspirations and talents and gifts. I diminish the fact that they're a child of God, and I sort of they become just this sexual being. That's all they're there for, and usually for my pleasure, not for theirs. And then adultery is a problem because how many ways do you need, Dave? Well, it's harmful. I mean, it breaks a bond, a covenant, a promise. It breaks a trust. The saying that trust takes a lifetime to build and an instant to break. It is harmful to families, children, even parents of couples that divorce are sometimes really grieve that loss. They have developed a relationship with this person. Sometimes they're even angry with their own child in the breaking when a couple breaks apart. It can break apart a community, and people find themselves having to choose sides. It has this destructive element and that leaves a whole wake of damage, and it's especially true in the church. And so it's not a surprise that Jesus says, "Oh, I know what's going on. Sorry, I'm not advancing this one, only that one. Excuse me while I figure out where I am." I'm gonna get there. Technology. So if those of you who are watching online, I apologize. I have been talking away without changing the slides, but we're back on track, I think. So problem I have is I've got to. So Jesus is serious about this, right? Um, the tendency that we might have, or people who are younger than us might have, to sort of laugh this off or give it a nervous giggle. Jesus is dead serious. He's says if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out, throw it away. Whoops, there we go. It's better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off, throw it away. It's better to lose one of your hands than for your whole body to go into hell. He also, Matthew has him reiterating this as well. And so it gets brought up again in chapter 18 when he's talking about children. If anyone causes one of these children to stumble, it'd be better for them to be maimed or go through life lame. Mark includes it in his gospel, so that there's something serious about this. I think we should state that Judaism did not practice or affirm or suggest self-mutilation. Every now and then you'll hear a story, usually in a psych journal somewhere, of somebody who literally took that literally and cut their hand off or poked an eye out. But Jesus is more expressing the gravity of the situation, that there's a lot of things that we could live without, and we'd be better off. And then there's the point that plucking out your eye doesn't solve the problem of lust. That's a matter of the heart and mind, not of your eyes or your hands. So we talked about what makes adultery so serious already, so I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on that. This is what we said. It diminishes the humanity of another person. It breaks the covenant of fidelity. It betrays a relationship. It creates mistrust in the community. We don't necessarily need to convince anybody that adultery is not a serious issue. We've all lived long enough to know that how it's damaged differing situations. If anything, we run the risk, I'm hesitating because I'm making this up right now, of looking at other groupings of people and condemning them, but the statistics amongst even Christian people are not good on this kind of thing. So people look at athletes and say, they're all just sleeping around. Well, So is Congress. And, so I mean, this is not something that we can really point the finger at other groupings of folks and say they are less um, uh, righteous than we are. So then he moves on and he says, you've heard it said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. I don't know how many of you have heard this before, but this is what is written in Deuteronomy 24:1. I might have printed it for you. Whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate. But I say to you, anyone who divorces his wife except on the grounds of well, that's what Jesus said. That's not going to help us. In 24:1, it says that if a man is unhappy with his wife, I know I printed this out because this was shocking to me. Suppose a man enters into a marriage with a woman, but she does not please him because he finds something objectionable about her. So he writes her a certificate of divorce, puts her in her hand and sends her out of his house. And she then leaves his house and goes off and becomes another man's wife. Well, then suppose the second man dislikes her, writes her a bill of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house. And it goes on to describe that the first man can't take her back. And we should just start with the woman has no place in this discussion. None of this is her choice. A man could divorce a woman, and there were two schools of thought. The more conservative school of thought said, if there was something like unchastity or that she's found to have had a relationship before she's married, then you can divorce her. The other school of thought says anything that you don't like. She could make a meal you don't like, and you could write her a certificate of divorce. And so this was the debate and kind of the schools of thought that were in the Jewish work. In fact, in certain circumstances, a woman who was raped could still be considered guilty if she didn't cry for help. I mean, the law was not fair to women at all, and that's not a thing we need to discuss today. We just need to accept that it was true, and the understanding of marriage in that sense was so casual that you could just say, well, I sent my wife because I was displeased with her behavior, and that was it. So Jesus says, you've heard it said, if you're going to divorce, you just give her a certificate of divorce. Now, the certificate was important because that freed her to remarry somebody else. And a woman that wasn't attached to a man in some way really had no way of surviving in the world, in that Jewish world. So that certificate was significant. But Jesus takes this on and says, oh, this is just another, we're not going to go there. This is me getting, I'm thinking too much. So in Matthew 19, they come to him, and say, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? And he says, no. Have you not read that the one who made them at the beginning made them male and female and said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one. They're no longer two than one. So what God has joined together, let no one separate. We hear that at wedding ceremonies all the time, right? But the notion is that something has happened. And when I do a wedding ceremony, sometimes I'll say, we're going to see a miracle right here. We're going to see two people become one family. And Jesus' point is something significant happens when you marry, and that something should not be split apart. So then they say, well, why did Moses command us to give a certificate of dismissal and divorce? And he simply says, because you were so hard-hearted that Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning, it was not so. Again, whoever divorces his wife except for unchastity and marries another commits adultery. And this except for unchastity, people wonder if that was inserted in later or if that was always in the text. We won't go there.
Were there any reasons for the dismissal? I mean, certificate of dismissal, isn't there a reason you have to
Well,
state?
yes. And so this notion of unchastity is the word is porneia, from which we get the word pornography, and it involves sexual sins. But again, there were various schools of thought, and some were more casual, and virtually any reason that you were unhappy with a woman could be reason enough to give a certificate of divorce. And there is a kind of an interesting discussion that's out there that one of the understandings of the phrase that is translated unchastity is the nakedness of a thing. And so the common understanding is the discovery of some sexual sin that occurred either before or during the marriage. Another interpretation is finds no favor, but there's a school of thought that suggests that it refers to specifically incestuous marriage. And this would have been significant amongst the Gentile community. And Matthew's writing to a community that a church community that has both Jews and Gentiles. And so there are some who say that what they're saying is divorce is permitted if you engaged in one of these incestuous marriages. That you would be okay divorcing in that situation, but otherwise, no. It's one of those things where it's somebody has proposed it. Nobody knows if that's really true or not, but it is an interesting thought. So it would be, except in the case of an illicit marriage. And if you think about it, I still use the phrase, if anyone knows any reason why this person cannot be married, you should speak now or forever hold your peace. And the history behind that is that there were men who would go from town to town and have a wife in all these different towns. And that might be considered then an illicit marriage and one that could be rightfully terminated. But Jesus is really just more serious. So both adultery and divorce fracture a covenant. They cause harm to individuals, families, and communities. And the bigger message is, in God's new age, there are means for holding relationships together. And that in the same sense that Jesus said, well, Moses permitted divorce because of your hardness of heart. In other words, it was in the old realm that you could do this, but now the new has started. And so now we say we live in a different way and in a different standard. And in the big picture, this whole thing is Jesus. I mean, the whole of the gospel is about Jesus saying, you guys need to live a different life than the people around you. And so if it's permitted to do this, that doesn't make it okay. Because how can you be salt and light in the world if you look just like everybody around you?
think in today's world, divorce, flip it. I think it's easy to say, I'm getting a divorce. I'm just done. And there's no, I mean, couples, I guess referring to young couples, are not willing to work at fixing it. And I speak from a long marriage. Marriage is a lot of work. It's a lot of work. But if you work at it, it gets more beautiful as the years go by.
And I hear you. I hesitate to say that certain people don't work at it, because I think that we also live in a little different culture. And sometimes a marriage lasts because husbands and wives just live fairly separate lives. They say, oh, those boys will be boys. They'll go do their thing. I'll have my girlfriends over here and we'll coexist. So that's one way. The other thing is most couples that make it for the long haul can point to a time where they weren't sure. They're like, man, we made it just by this much. And so there's sort of a there, but by the grace of God go I. It could have gone, and I'm not here to comment on anybody's marriage. But sometimes when someone says, we never argue, well, there's a lot of reasons not to argue. One is that one person never expresses their opinion. And then you never have an argument. So I mean, if I have now I'm off on a tangent. Way to go. I have a friend. I have a minister friend. We went to seminary together. I just saw him recently again, and he tells wedding couples, every 10 years you're making a contract, whether you understand it or not, about how you're going to relate to each other, and it's going to last about 10 years. And if you don't renegotiate it after 10 years, it's going to be a problem. You're either going to separate and find separate lives from each other, or you're going to split up, because we don't stay the same. We don't have the same desires that we had when we're 20. You know, when I'm 40, I have a whole different way of looking at the world, and the chances that my spouse and I have changed in the same ways are pretty slim. But I'm not here to give marriage advice. I'm the lucky one. And so I'm here to say,
And you said it first. She's not with us.
You've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. This comes from Leviticus. Again, the Mosaic law, if anyone who kills a human being shall be put to death. Anyone who kills an animal shall make restitution for it, life for life. Anyone who maims another shall suffer the same injury in return. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. The injury inflicted is the injury to be suffered. One who kills an animal shall make restitution for it, but one who kills a human being shall be put to death. And you've probably heard that they call it the law of Talion, that when this was put in place by Moses, this was not a license to inflict harm. It was a way of minimizing the escalation, because the human tendency is if you hurt me, I'm going to try to hurt you more. If you do something to me, I'm gonna pay back, not just equal, but more. It's a much more complicated situation than I'm saying here, but God, the Hamas attacked Israel and killed 1,600 people. Israel responded by killing 70,000 people. And so this law was to prevent the escalation of conflict, which would then be a preserved community. In some sense, it was to say, okay, you did this to me, I did this to you, we're even, we can both walk away now. As opposed to the ongoing vengefulness. So this law was presented as a way of minimizing or stopping the conflict and creating a truce to it. Jesus says, though, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on, you've heard this, strikes you on the right cheek, turn to them the other also. If anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. And these can be, we'll take them apart a little bit because there's a number of different stages in there of what's being asked. Comes out of Lamentations. I mean, there's nothing clearly that says you should turn the other cheek. But in Lamentations, it says in the middle there, sit alone in silence when the Lord has imposed it, to put one's mouth to the dust, to give one's cheek to the smiter, and be filled with insults. And part of the background to all this, oh, here's some other examples. This comes from Proverbs. Do not say, I will do to others as they have done for me. I will pay them back for what they have done. 1 Thessalonians in the New Testament, see that none of you repays evil for evil, but always seek to do good to one another and all. So there's some presence of this response in Jewish culture already. So it's been noted that a slap on the right cheek is either the blow of a left-handed person, because to hit my right cheek, you come across this way, or it's a backhanded slap with the right hand, which is considered to be an excessive or an additional insult. So this was insult. Some even say a slap with the left hand. The left hand is what was the one you used for toilet paper, and so it was even more of an insult. So the notion here is being slapped is insulting. So when someone insults you, how do we respond? And Jesus says, turn the other also. Allow yourself to be insulted. Why would that be a piece of advice that Jesus suggested?
You're taking a higher position than the person that slapped
So there's a sense in which you haven't stooped to their level. You've taken the high road, we would say, when you the higher position.
But it's almost a forgiveness. Forgiving the person for.
Okay. Yeah. I don't have the right answer here.
As to not escalate, because once you do, then just watch a football game.
It's true. You know what they always say? It's getting a little chippy out there, and that means that they're just hurting one another.
You're a baseball game. You know, the pitcher hits a batter, and before you know it, everybody's at home plate.
And the other pitcher is expected to hit someone, and they just do it. And it's almost like, I don't want to do this, but I got to throw the ball at you. So
I'll try not to hurt you.
I'll go for the lower part of the body. Any significance to the fact that you say the right cheek there?
only that, I mean, I don't know, but the question would be whether it's a backhanded slap, which is a little bit more of an insult than an open-handed slap. So if I was going to hit you on your right cheek, point to your right cheek. Yeah, so I'd have to either come across this way or I'd have to use my left hand, both of which would be a greater insult. But I think the larger point is don't retaliate, but offer or take another one. And then he says this other one: if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the second mile. You've probably heard somewhere from some pastor sometime that a Roman soldier could conscript any of the Jewish people and make them carry a load. They say it originated with the postal service, but well, not the U.S. Postal Service, but the Roman Postal Service. But it was also the kind of thing that, as we know, people in power often get a little addicted to their power and would take advantage of it. The only biblical example that we have of this happening is when Simon the Cyrene was conscripted to carry the cross of Jesus. That it was just pointed at him and said, "You carry this." And we tend not to think of it as coming out of this this oppression or this rule of occupation, but they suggest it probably was. Probably heard this expression: an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. You know who said it? Who it's attributed to? Attributed to Mahatma Gandhi. But I did some digging because I'm your advocate, and I wanted to know really where did this come from. It turns out in 1914, a politician and journalist was arguing against the death penalty in the Canadian House of Parliament. And he mentioned the well-known verse of Exodus and then employed it in a trope about the members of Parliament. He said, "We can argue all we like, but if capital punishment is being inflicted on some man, we are inclined to say it serves him right. That is not the spirit I believe in which legislation should be enacted. If in this present age we were to go back to the old time of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, there would be very few gentlemen in this house who would not be, metaphorically speaking, blind and toothless." And a biographer of Mahatma Gandhi used this expression to summarize Gandhi's position, but there's no reference to any talk or speech or writing that he said it. Martin Luther King used it in his sermons. Violence as a way of achieving racial justice is both impractical and immoral. It's impractical because it's a descending spiral ending in the destruction for everyone. The old law, an eye for an eye, leaves everybody blind, he said, because it seeks to humiliate your opponent rather than win his understanding. It seeks to annihilate rather than to convert. Ironically, it's also in Fiddler on the Roof. I didn't realize that, but a man said to Tevye, "We should defend ourselves. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." And Tevye says, "Very good. And that way the whole world will be blind and toothless." So this is an expression that has been around. There's some question as to whether Jesus gave any of these as being practical solutions or simply you should do this. So he says, "Do not resist the evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. If anyone wants to sue you, take your coat, give your cloak as well. If anyone forces you to go a mile, go also the second mile." Is this literally, does he literally means this? Or is this a figurative statement, do you think?
He literally means that your response should be something that responds to the other person's aggression, leaves them in an awkward position because you're not forced to take some retribution.
So chances are good nobody's going to come up and slap you. Probably, right? Not now. Maybe when you were younger, but not now.
Maybe in New York.
Chances are
Well, in New York.
no one's going to force you to carry their suitcase for a mile. But you might get sued. You might get insulted. And so are we being literal here? If you get sued, just give up the case. Someone might try to take advantage of you. Scammers.
Well, look what happened. Look at the emails. I got 2 from you.
Okay, let's back up. You didn't get 2 from me. You got 2 that were purporting to be from me.
Not 2.
So do not resist an evildoer.
Well, my take on this is Jesus was known for parables, but this seems to me much more direct than his parables. It's worded differently. So I hear this as, in the parables, I'm going to give you examples of what could happen. But here, I think he's being much more definitive.
There's commentators spend a lot of time talking about whether your coat or your cloak is more serious and all this kind of stuff, and I found it not to be interesting enough, not interesting enough to make a point about it. But in fact, Jesus' audience and his own disciples contained a group that were called zealots. We know this because when they list the list of disciples, they say it was Simon the Zealot. And zealots' plan was to overthrow the Roman occupation. Perhaps it was a pipe dream, but that was their goal. And so if one of the questions I've put up there is this Jesus making a statement to the zealots saying, this isn't your fight? If a Roman soldier forces you to go a mile, don't resist it, which would be your tendency. In fact, carry it double. Or is this a personal thing, an individual thing that has nothing to do with an occupying force and things like that? And one way of seeing this is that by carrying the load a second mile, you say, you can't force me because I'm doing this of my own volition. I'm choosing to serve you so that it is not about your control. In some sense, it takes control back from the situation.
You could see that as a statement by the person in an effort to improve the relations between the Romans and the Israelis. In other words, if a Roman soldier commands you or enlists you to carry a box or a baggage a mile, take it the second mile. And you maybe improve the relations between the Roman soldiers and the Israeli citizens.
And that takes us back to the question, is this practical advice to try to restore, build a relationship, or is it simply, this isn't going to change anything, other than who you are. This is about who you are, not about you fixing somebody else. And we'll talk a little bit more about that coming up. And then it gets even more closer to home. If anyone, give to everyone who begs from you. Do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow. So we may not get slapped. We may not has to carry a box. We may not get sued, but I'll guarantee someone has begged from you.
Every single day in nobody.
And so the question is, are we supposed to give to them all?
Yeah, the last scripture you read and this together.
Would somebody do me a favor and just close that door? I'd go do it, but I'm.
To me, it's saying don't feed someone who's negative or don't add to it. Be kind and gentle and generous, and I think it's speaking to the person, not to feed negativism and to be kind and generous.
So here's what it says in Deuteronomy. If there's among you anyone in need, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward your needy neighbor. You should rather open your hand, willingly lending enough to meet the need, whatever it might be. Since there will never cease to be some in need on the earth, I therefore command you, open your hand to the poor and needy neighbor in your land. And there's a sense in which Jesus is not giving a new commandment. He's reiterating a commandment that had been there from the beginning, perhaps had gotten forgotten. And we're champions of that, looking back at the scriptures and saying, yeah, look at this one when it agrees with what we already think, but neglecting them when they don't. We live with, I said this last time, the ongoing question of, did Jesus really intend us to follow these things? And one of the responses is, no, he knew we couldn't. He wanted us to know how badly we needed forgiveness. Another is that this is what it means to live as God's people. And we may not get there, but this is what we strive for. And so then we come to this one. You've heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Does it really say that? So Leviticus 19 says, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And this I am the Lord is a statement that says this is really from God. The same chapter doesn't stop there. The alien who resides with you shall be to you as the citizen among you. You shall love the alien as yourself. Why? Because you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Meaning really serious. So it does say you shall love your neighbor as yourself. That part comes out of the law. So you've heard it said, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But does it say you should hate your enemies? The closest I could find is, do I not hate those who hate you? Do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with perfect hatred. I count them my enemies. Where is this from? Lots of people's favorite psalm, Psalm 139. Where can I go from your presence? Surely the darkness is not darkness to you. And then all of a sudden there's this verse, and it gets worse. Oh, that you would dash their heads on the rock. Where did this come from? That's the closest I could find to that we could hate your enemies. So, love your enemies, Jesus says. Pray for those who persecute you. So are these 6, are we just building towards the hardest one? Is this like the climax to the whole thing? Is the intensity ratcheted up? Or are they just random thoughts that Jesus had? Oh, by the way, I thought about this one too. Yeah.
I was thinking, what would Jesus do? Okay, at this time, Sermon on the Mount, Jesus was building up for it. He knew he was leaving this world, going to be with his Father. So they say, what would Jesus do? If we remember this, we do these things. We think, is it marriage? Is it the neighbor? Is it that? So it's wisdom based on what Jesus would do. He's on the Sermon on the Mount, so he has all these regular people just like us there. So he's telling us, think, why is this? There's a reason. Open your mind and do something that is correct, as is appropriate that I would do.
Yeah, and the only thing I would say there is what Jesus would do is the unexpected thing. And so the expected thing is you love your neighbor and hate your enemy. And Jesus is saying, no, do what I do. I love my enemies. On the cross, he prayed what? Forgive them. They don't know what they're doing.
There's something here a lot more than wisdom. What would that be? That would be, this is the gift from Christ, I guess.
Right. There's much more than common sense.
Right.
This is not like, well, this way you'll win them over and they'll become your friend. It has nothing to do with what's going to happen to them or what's going to work out for you. It has everything to do with you living in the way of Christ.
You asked a question too, is this for literal things or non-literal things? He didn't say it wasn't for, he just said, this is what you do. He didn't distinguish between literal and non-literal. So this is, anybody asks something, use your mind and think the right thing.
When I don't know how you are, but when I come across someone who's begging, my first thought is, what are they going to do with this money? And at other churches than this one, I've always had a pastor's fund that I could give out, and people would know that, and I'd listen to these stories, and I'd find myself going, this is the craziest story ever. And I had a guy sit in my office and tell me he had walked from Georgia to Florida because he just needed to talk to his brother, and then turned around and walked back. He was walking back and he needed some money for boots. I said, well, do you want me to get you bus fare? No, I'm just walking with Jesus. So I gave him $20 because it was a great story. And the next day a guy comes in and says, I need some money. And I said, well, I can't just give out money. And he said, well, you gave some to my friend yesterday. I said, oh, you mean Tony? He told me he was walking to Georgia. And he said, no, he lives in the camp with me. And the number of times that's happened can make you really cynical. But part of me says, I'm not going to be judged on how smart I am at discerning whether this is a trick or not. I'm just going to be judged on whether I'm generous. That person's going to be judged on whether they're lying or not. But that's not what I'm judged on. I'm judged on am I generous or not? Am I open-hearted or not? Am I caring and compassionate or not? It's on them what they do with the money.
I go back to years ago, my son, many times, but he came across, he just got a tour. There was a woman with a baby, And she came up to him and asked him for money, and he had learned way back that he had been basically scammed. And he said, well, what do you want? What do you need? And she said, I need baby food. He said, let's go inside. Whatever you pick, I will buy for that baby. And so he did. She needed to get on the bus, and he bought a bus ticket, but didn't give out any money because he had been scammed before. So he learned a
Yeah.
lesson.
And even that requires being generous with your time. It's not just money. Because how many times do I say, I just want to give him $20 because I'm busy today. And that way,
I gave Ronnie money
yeah, now he's gone.
and he's gone, but
Where'd he go?
One theory is Ronnie is gone because Donnie invited him to come to church and that freaked him out. He didn't want to get that close to a community of people. All right, we got to keep going here because I'm going to finish and we got important stuff. Whoops, I went the wrong way. So which enemies? All of them? The Rome? Does it mean Rome? Or does it mean your neighbor who blows his leaf blower right when I'm trying to have my prayer time in the morning? Not that, I mean, hypothetically. I mean, is it the person who annoys me, or are we talking about Rome here? That you should love your oppressor. What does he mean by love them? Most would say it doesn't mean you have warm and fuzzy feelings. It doesn't mean you necessarily like them, but that love refers to some actions, wanting the best for them, praying for what is good for them, not what's good for me, putting their needs before my own. So maybe it is giving, carrying the load for the Roman soldier because they don't want to carry it. You know, why would Jesus ask this of his followers?
Was to be appreciated through their actions and through their religion. And I think they were outcast by many other groups. And so it showed if you had some credibility or you had some personal actions that you would be looked at in a better light.
What about, your enemy might be different than mine. Okay,
Mhm.
just because he's your enemy, I gotta treat him different too.
And the enemy of my enemy is
I
my
got own
friend.
feelings about my enemies and everybody else's enemies, we get, this is not specific. Unless you're thinking in the singular person.
And one of the things that I was going through is, remember the story of the Good Samaritan? Remember how it starts? A guy comes up and says to Jesus, what must I do to be saved? And Jesus says, well, you know the commandments. And they list them off. And love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says, yeah, do that and you'll live. And his first question is, well, who's my neighbor? And sometimes we see these things that Jesus says, well, which enemy? Well, how much do I have to give the person who begs to me? And right away, my tendency is to go be like that lawyer, which is almost like what's the minimum I can do here and still satisfy this? And that's exactly against Jesus' point. So why does he ask this? Well, he tells them, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven, because God shines the sun on both the evil and the good. He sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. God treats them all as God's children. And they're God's children too. And so that's why you love them. Not because they're good or bad. In some sense, a parent doesn't love their child because they behave or don't behave. They like it when they do, but they love them because it's their child. And they may not love everything that they do. They may wish that they behave differently in the world. And so Jesus is suggesting that the same thing is true for us. That we don't have to love what you do, but I still have to recognize that you are God's child. And that's a challenging thing to do. I mean, it's easy to pray that and pray for the people who persecute you that they'll stop and they'll become different people. But Jesus is simply saying, pray for what's best for them. As if I knew. I don't know what we're doing next. Oh, so then this is the concluding statement. Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. And in my mind, this takes us full circle. Because we start with not one letter of the law will pass away. And here's what it means. So be perfect, as your Father in heaven is perfect. Any questions?
Have we done away with a lot of the law?
Have we?
Have we, I mean, in this generation, it seems like, that's ancient history. And really not to be picked at, reapplied.
I don't know. What do you think?
We would take everything seriously because it comes from God.
We're pretty good at being selective on which laws we think people should follow. Let me just be perfect as your heavenly Father in heaven is perfect. It comes again out of Leviticus 19. Seems to be a favorite chapter for what Jesus is picking at. He must have really paid attention in Hebrew class that day. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to all the congregation and say to them, you shall be holy, for the Lord, I the Lord, am holy. And yet Jesus uses the word perfect. Luke said, when Luke quotes this, he says, be merciful just as your Father in heaven is merciful. And there's a statement in the Jewish, it's called the Talmud, it's sort of the commentary on the Jewish law that says, be compassionate and merciful as God is compassionate and merciful. And so the question is, what is Jesus saying when he uses the word perfect? Well, the word perfect in Greek, which I just proved that I can cut and paste it, teleos, which is the Hebrew for tamim, which is perfect. The root word meaning for that is to be undivided or whole or complete. Telos is the Greek word. It's that word for goal or completeness. So the word in seminary was teleological, or in philosophy, which is where the whole shebang is headed. And in some sense it means that be the person God intended you to be. Be the person that God is calling you to be. Be the person that God wants you to be.
But if we didn't have all of this, we wouldn't know how to be that person. And that, anybody that doesn't have the faith, they don't care about all of this, but because we are studying it, hear it, know it, try to live it. And I think that's all God intends for us to do.
And I will say it doesn't necessarily mean moral perfection or not doing anything wrong. To be holy was to be set apart. I used to tell my confirmation class that in my family, we had the fancy dishes that were set apart for company. And we had the everyday dishes that were for the rest of us, for us kids to handle. And we had the fancy dining room that was set apart for special occasions. And when it says in the Hebrew scriptures that the implements or the utensils of the tabernacle were holy, it didn't mean that, they had little halos on them. It meant that they were set apart and only used for religious purposes. And so one way to look at Jesus saying be perfect after all this is to be different, be set apart for a special purpose. And that special purpose is to be light and salt in the world. And the way you be light and salt is you don't be like everybody else. And if everybody else exacts revenge, you don't do that. If everybody else hates their enemy, you love your enemy. And this is how people will know that there's something special about what God is doing in this world. And this is how people will know how God intended this world to be. Well, we're past time. I'm going to end with this thing. I've mentioned Steve Garnis Holmes before because I claim my wife has a crush on him because she's always reading his stuff. But he's a good writer. So if you're going to have a crush on someone, he's a good person to have it on. But he wrote this called "You Have Heard That It Was Said." You've heard that it was said, charity begins at home. Your care should be confined by what you know. But I say to you, love is not bound. It stretches your will, enlarging your soul, confounding constraint, making you bleed. For if you care alone for those who are near, what have you learned but to subsist? You've heard that it was said, oh, I just did that one. What happened? You can't teach an old dog new tricks. Your learning of life is dulled by your age, but I say to you, a tree grows until its dying day. Living is learning, experience, and the new knocking on each other, making discipleship true. For if you know only yesterday's answer, where will you meet the risen Christ anew? You've heard it said that it was said, a friend in need is a friend indeed. Your action is spurred by trouble or demand, but I say an ally anticipates, knows before the alarm, the urge to empathy, the need to act and intervene for the good. For if you wait for the call, hesitant, reserved, can the name friend be a true title for you? You've heard it said that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Your imagination is held tight by what is, but I say a better way there might be. Sight isn't vision. What's comfortable can be a sham. How things are excludes too much. For if you let what is be all, where do you see the kingdom's changing call? You've heard it said, a little of what you fancy does you good. Your cravings directing what you feel whole. But I say to you, your fancy is often a fraud, indulgent, self-satisfying, pretending to control a reason that's false to fool your own self. For if you measure your pleasure by only what appeals, whose will is done? You've heard that it was said, blood is thicker than water. Ties of birth determine who's kin, but I say to you, kin is belonging that's given by God. Ties that bind are as wide as sovereign grace. For you, if you make your clan your sole affinity, then where then is God's plan for inclusion that heals? You've heard that it was said, paddle your own canoe. All that matters is the self that is you, but I say the self is so insistent, was made in the encounter of others, their touch and their care made you, created your space to occupy. For if you seek just what satisfies you, where will you be in making others other? You've heard that it was said, children should be seen and not heard, for they have yet to earn their place in the world. But I say to you, now is the time to live in respect, not tomorrow and not yet. Joy is for now, and it's not an adult soul inheritance. For if you deny the children voices, how may you know the things that you've lost? You've heard that it was said, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. He's getting them all, doesn't he? For I'm the arbiter of what appeals, but I say to you, the pattern of life so vast is more than you can see. Empathy, knowing, and delight, so much bigger, grander than one can take of what's in sight. For if you see only what suits you now, where is the space into which your soul might grow? You've heard that it was said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. A golden rule that encompasses all, but I say to you, that is the meaning of the prophets and the law, and not a stroke, not a comma of them shall be undone, but the grace that I bring gives more. For if your righteousness gives what you would get, does it not make a bargain of what can only be free? Here's the notion, here's the action. In the realm where grace is all, not commonplace, not easy, not as we said, nor what's agreeable. It's just the enigma of a God with an earthly frame calling us on, not to abolish, but to fulfill and to seek in all things the divine will. That's when you're up. Chapter 6, next week. You go into personal piety. It's going to talk about prayer. It's going to talk about pledging to the church. It's going to talk about all kinds of good stuff. Let me say a prayer and we got to get out of here. Well, gracious God, we give thanks for these challenging words. We pray that as we leave here, that somewhere, some person, some situation will call these to mind and encourage us, inspire us to behave as you would behave in our world. We do ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you.